Colorfully painted skulls or calaveritas are a Mexican tradition that takes place around the Day of the Dead at the beginning of November. Keep watching to learn how to make your own. Hi, my name is Mario. I will teach you how to make calaveritas or Mexican painted skulls with clay. The materials you will need are the following: a bit of water to moisten your clay, a dough roller, air drying clay, some rubber bands, something to create a base to support your skull. Here I use a foam ball which I can squeeze out once my skull is dry, and I molded a piece of wax candle for the front part of the skull. You can use any moldable material to create this part, for example a bunch of foil paper, acrylic paints, paint brushes, a small plastic sheet to cover your skull base, a spatula or kitchen knife to cut your clay, a bottle of varnish. I molded a piece of wax candle by cutting it, warming and deforming it to make it fit the foam ball and form a good basic shape for the skull. Then I used rubber bands to hold them together. Afterwards, I covered it with a sheet of plastic. This is to make it easier to remove the finished clay model from the mold. Then I took my clay out and started kneading it a bit and moistening to improve the malleability. The next step was to flatten it with my dough roller until it was about 5 mm thick. Make sure to use enough clay for this. It is better to have too much than too little. In this case, I had too much, so I just cut the extras. As you can see, I covered my base with the sheet of clay I made and joined and repaired the parts that needed it, using a bit of water and massaging the clay until I saw it was glued together. There were parts like the jaw, which were a bit too short, and I had to attach some extra clay to complete them. If you need to smooth some areas that appear too rough, you can do it adding a bit of extra water. Add it little by little, as you don't want the clay to get overly runny. Once I was happy with the basic shape of my skull, I roughly marked where the middle of the skull was and where the eyes, nose, and mouth would go, and proceeded to cut the holes for the eye sockets, nose, and the area behind the teeth by the jaw joint with the spatula. The edges ended up being a bit too rough, so I smoothed them by adding a bit of water. The next step was to add more volume to the eyebrow area and the cheekbones. For this, I grabbed the clay I cut out from the eyes and nose and rolled it in my hands to create strips. Then, with a bit of water, I attached them to the corresponding areas of the skull. I used my spatula to spread the clay a bit more to help me bind the newly added clay to the skull base, and then rub the clay to smooth and refine it. Now my skull was ready to dry. I left it overnight and then removed the base support and the plastic inside and let it dry for a few more hours. In this case, I had another skull I had made before and that was ready for painting. Since I used white clay to sculpt it, I did not have to paint a white base first, but if you have a different color of clay, you may want to do this as you might want to have a white canvas in which you will be able to lay down your colors more easily. It is important to protect your work surface with some paper or plastic to avoid staining it with your paints. I took my acrylic paints and put a small drop of different colors on my plastic surface, although you can use a palette or some other surface for this as well. Then, with a small brush and a tiny bit of water, I began painting my skull. This was a complete improvisation, but of course, you could plan your design in advance. Quite often, these Mexican skulls will include the name of a loved one written on the forehead to give it as a gift and remind them of our own mortality and that we should enjoy life to the fullest. Once my skull was painted, I left it to dry for a few minutes. Usually acrylic paints dry quite fast, unless you use very big amounts of it or add too much water. Remember not to make your skull too wet as it will start to soften and deform. As my painted skull had dried, I proceeded to varnish. I used polyurethane gloss varnish for arts and crafts for this. This is not an absolutely necessary step, however, it will add a nice glossiness to the skull and provide some protection. To varnish, I just used a larger brush and applied it quickly all around the outer surface of the skull. Varnishing the inside is not necessary. My skull was then finished. I just let it dry for a couple of hours. Here is a photo of our Mexican skull painting workshop with Gorgi Collective, and as you can see, there are many ways of decorating them, so don't be afraid to experiment to create your own design. I hope you liked this video. Feel free to like and subscribe and leave a comment. Check out our other Gorgi Collective social media as well. And thanks for watching.